So the road to happiness, philosophies of China, Confucian, Daoist, Buddhist. This is not a competition. I'm going to talk about the contributions that each of them can make in different aspects of our lives. Next, please. So late last month, I was participating in a conference in Shanghai online, and it was about Chinese philosophy from the perspective of world philosophy. And this is a very important topic, and I delivered a presentation on what I call Platypus Philosophies. And what that actually refers to is something that is initially considered non-existent, or perhaps a hoax, just as the platypus was when it was discovered by Europeans. And initially, the scientists in Europe thought that there could be no such animal. They had never seen anything like that. So this is very similar to what I hear sometimes from my colleagues who are trained in so-called Western philosophy, who are occasionally willing to talk about China as a wisdom tradition, which places it in the past, rather than respecting the contributions, not just from the past, but that are continuing from Chinese philosophy and other forms of philosophy outside of Europe and America. Next, please. So one of the things that has become discussed in some philosophical circles is philosophical coloniality. It's been defined as the logic, metaphysics, ontology, and matrix of power created by the massive processes of colonization and decolonization, intrinsically tied to what is called Western civilization and Western modernity. So the notion that civilization is a Western concept or contribution, and also modernism comes only from the West. These things are not completely accurate. So one of the things that are entrenched in these Euro-American philosophies is a kind of a fixation on things that are stagnant. For example, spending literally thousands of years trying to locate being, universal eternal truths, ideals of perfection, and this notion that reason must always triumph over emotion, and a disrespect actually for the human potential of emotion. So these are ways in which I think Chinese philosophy in particular can make very important challenges to the way philosophy has previously been studied. Next. So there has been some very interesting research into linguistic practices, and they find that Indo-European languages tend to emphasize nouns, which is something stagnant, whereas particularly classical Chinese favors verbs. And that also shows the dynamic aspect of Chinese philosophy. Next, please. So the common threads that I'm going to be discussing in terms of these three forms of Chinese philosophy are relationships, responsibility, literally the ability to respond, and relevance, but in different areas. Next. So in Confucianism, the relationship we're going to concentrate on is between human beings. Our responsibility is self-cultivation, and the relevance particularly is for Confucians with their emphasis on social political philosophy on models of leadership. In Daoism, it has to do with our relationship with nature or Dao. We are responsible to have a reversion to Dao, and this is very relevant to issues of ecology today. In Buddhism, it's a relationship with our Buddha nature. Our responsibility is non-attachment. This is not detachment, which is the exact opposite of attachment, but it is the middle way in between those two, as we'll see. And this does have some relevance. I will be arguing for American gun culture and how we can deal with that. Next, please. So primal Confucian philosophy, human relationships. The orchids let out their fragrance, even if there is no one around to appreciate it. Likewise, men of noble character will not let poverty deter their will guided by high principles and morals. That is very much a Confucian sentiment, that we have a responsibility even when we're alone. Next. So I'm going to be looking at some passages from a very important text, the Wisdom of the Daoist, very often translated as Great Learning, but it could also be adult education. It was a text that is traced back to Confucius himself, perhaps Confucius's philosophy set down by his students, and it's intended for those who are going into a career as a scholar official. They have gone through their Confucian training, and these are additional recommendations for how they can be responsible as leaders in their position as a scholar official, but specifically the responsibility for self-cultivation. Next. So it's divided into what are called the 3 chords and the 8 threads. So what is the mission of a scholar official, a person in social political leadership? Shedding light on luminous virtue within all of us, freshening people, and resting in the paramount good. And how are these to be accomplished? These are the 8 threads. First, things are investigated. Then knowledge is expanded. This allows sincere intentions to be fostered. So that's the emotional component. Then emotional and intellectual limits are recognized. 5 is considered the most important. Once you've gone through the investigation and the expansion of knowledge and the sincere intentions and noticing your emotional and intellectual limits, then you need to continue cultivating yourself. At that point, you're able to harmonize the family. And the next step is healing the state. And finally, the world is placid. Next, please. So these are set forth in 2 different ways. So it starts with the ancients. This is something that is not invented by Confucius, but he is just carrying on the tradition. So the ancients considered this very carefully. So this is the text itself. The ancients, wishing to illuminate luminous virtue throughout the world, first healed their states. Wishing to heal their states, first harmonized their families. Wishing to harmonize their families, first cultivated themselves. Wishing to cultivate themselves, first recognized their emotional and intellectual limits. Wishing to recognize their limits, first fostered sincere intentions. Wishing to foster sincere intentions, first set out to expand their knowledge. Expansion of knowledge requires investigating things. Next. So section 5 repeats exactly the same thing, but starts in the reverse order. First, we investigate, then we expand knowledge, then we foster sincere intentions, our limits are reached, cultivation is done, then we are in a position to harmonize our family, heal the state, and bring about world peace. Next. So from the Son of Heaven, the emperor, to the common people, all must take cultivation of self as the root. I think this is extremely significant. It is not just the leader who needs to do this. Every single individual must do that. And number 7 explains why. The self-cultivation is the root. If the roots are entangled, if we don't cultivate the self, then the offshoots cannot be healthy. It is impossible to have what deserves priority, literally the thick, slighted, while what is slight or thin is given priority. Or as we would put it today, we have to get our priorities straight, starting with self-cultivation. Next, please. So the relevance here is how one serves as a leader for others and helps them to develop their self-cultivation skills. Next. So the primary virtue in early Confucianism is the notion of ran. So emulating the sage kings of old, the profound person is fit to be a leader if they are a person of Ren, is often translated into English as humaneness or respect. And we can consider it a cognitive vaccine against dehumanization, to recognize the humanness of others and the need to work together. Next. This is from the commentary, and I find it to be one of the most remarkable passages from the text, and it cites a text prior to the time of Confucius, the Enjoinder to Kang. Treat the people as if safeguarding an infant. If one's heart-mind aims sincerely, even though one misses the mark, one is not far from it. A young woman does not need to learn how to raise an infant before she is married. So I find it quite striking that a young mother is serving as a model for people in leadership positions. And very often there is a parental association between the ruler and their people. And if you are a good mother or father, then you will do the best you can to take care of the children. So it's very natural. Next. So what we find here is a continuum of private and public values. We have to cultivate ourselves intellectually and emotionally, and then we will be fit to be leaders in our family, in our societies, and in the world. So professed values are not enough. We have to have lived values if we are to promote social harmony. So this would avoid egocentric priorities of authoritarians who are only intent on expanding their personal power. Next. So let's turn to Daoist philosophy, where we have a relationship with nature or Tao. Next, please. So this is the wisdom of Wei Wu Wei, or action without artificial action. And we become responsible for reversion to Tao. Tao being the model for nature itself. Next. So very often there's a misunderstanding about Wei and Wu Wei. They're associated with yang energy and yin energy, but very often yin energy is misperceived. So yang is assertiveness, it is impulsiveness, it is what we might say in English, pushing the envelope. But many times people will think, well, that means that yin energy is just passive. But if you look at the text of the Tao Te Ching, that's clearly not what is being discussed. So the Taoist sage neither acts upon, that is, tries to manipulate or exploit nature, but is not passively acted upon nature. There is an interaction, and Tao, again, using the parental model, is seen as our mother, and we are the children of Tao. So we need to interact with the mother and to emulate the mother and to harmonize with the mother. And we do that through Wei Wu Wei, avoiding artificial yang kinds of activities. Next, please. So Jhongse is another of the great philosophers of Taoism, and he uses a whole series of images and stories, very often having to do with animals. So for him, the yang energy is represented by a praying mantis who is attempting to stop a carriage by waving its arms. So this is not a very good idea for the praying mantis, who is very likely to be killed by that carriage, which is going to roll over him. So as we see in the Tao Te Ching, yang is aligned with death, trying to make things happen, to take control of the situation. The yin kind of activity is associated by Jhongse with the tiger tamer. So if you want to work with tigers, which could be interpreted as a difficult person in a position of authority, you don't enter the tiger's cage if it has not yet been fed. So you don't try to take control over the tiger, but understand its nature and the time when it would be productive to interact with the tiger. Therefore, yin is aligned with life. It is not a passive reaction to the world, but it is understanding how the nature of things are and aligning oneself with them. Next, please. So this is chapter 38 from the Tao Te Ching. Supreme virtuosity is non-virtuous. Therefore, it has virtuosity. It doesn't assert itself. It is not yang. Inferior virtuosity does not lose its virtue. Therefore, it has no virtuosity. So it is trying to make things happen. Supreme virtuosity is wu wei and involves no artifice. Inferior virtuosity exerts effort, again, yang, involving artifice. Next, please. Chapter 77. The Tao of heaven reduces what is excessive, supplements what is deficient. The Tao of humanity functions contrariwise. It further reduces what is already deficient, thereby offering it to the excessive. Sometimes we talk about the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer. That seems to be the Tao of humanity discussed here. So who can have excess to offer to the world? Only those who follow Tao, following the Tao of heaven. Next. So the relevance here is ecology. And I'm just going to give one brief example that is historic. Next. So reversion is the movement of Tao. Suppleness is the function of Tao. 10,000 things in the world originate in beingness. Being originates in no thingness. Going back to the way that Tao functions is the most efficient and the most effective. Next. So the example here is a tremendous engineering project at Dujiangyan in Sichuan province. I had had the opportunity to visit the location twice. And unfortunately, the slide's a little bit off, but this is a photograph of the temple. And these are the words of the engineer, Li Bing, dredge the sand and build the dam lower. So this was his solution to avoid having these kinds of floods that would be very difficult for the people. And the best way is to follow the pattern of nature. Instead of trying to build higher walls to keep back the water, you dredge the sand because the nature of water is to go to the lowest point. Give it the lowest point to go to. Next, please. So this is a photograph of the Irrigation Project, and it looks quite natural. And that's exactly what they've been doing for hundreds and hundreds of years. They dredge the channels more deeply. They put the island in the middle to slow down the flow, and it has been very effective for those hundreds and hundreds of years without trying to build huge walls that eventually would be overcome by raging waters. So this is following the yin values. Next, please. So literally what we need to do is get out of the way of the way. And this is a contemporary manifestation. It's something called rewilding. It's considered now a progressive approach to conservation that aims to restore ecosystems by stripping away human interventions. So the reason that the ecosystems are being destroyed is because humans are manipulating them and exploiting them for their own purposes. And as the ecologist says, you see that as soon as you provide enough room, nature comes back almost instantly. So not only is it effective, but it is very quickly effective because the main problem that is creating the ecological devastation are these interventions. Next, please. So now let's turn to Buddhist philosophy and our relationship to Buddha nature. Next, please. So Master Xingyun is a contemporary Buddhist master, and he says quite clearly, simply accept the fact that you are a Buddha. And this is not Master Xingyun, by the way. This is a Buddhist nun. Simply accept the fact that you are a Buddha. So have this relationship to yourself, your true identity versus your deluded identity, as we might say. Next, please. So Kenneth Inada is an excellent scholar in Buddhism, and he has a very clear and concise discussion of Buddhism's impact on Chinese culture. So Buddhism arrived in China around the 1st century CE, and Buddhist philosophy begins to permeate the culture around the 5th century. So it takes several hundred years for it to be taken seriously in a philosophical sense. And as Inada says, for the subsequent roughly 5 centuries, it will historically be known as Buddhism in China, but more correctly, with the Chinese genius in full swing, Buddhism will be transformed or Sinicized into Chinese Buddhism, establishing and exhibiting one of the great cultural feats of the world by meshing together 2 huge ideologies, one native and the other foreign. So there is Chinese Buddhism, but there's something that has happened to Buddhism. There's a transformation that is helpful to both Buddhism and to Chinese culture. Next, please. Again, Inada, the greatest gift of Buddhism to Chinese thought is the offer of an elaborate and profound metaphysics of human experience. Buddhism in China turned out to be a unique mix of doctrines that had the basic native flavor spiced well with exotic fragrance and taste. The consequence of which is that a most vibrant period in Chinese cultural history appeared that cannot be ignored nor forgotten. And I think this gift can also be found as Buddhism goes into other cultures and brings this elaborate and profound metaphysics of human experience that we can apply today. Next, please. So one of the early Chinese monks is a person called Zhidun, and he was in a position to try to see where Buddhism fit at this early stage. So he's in the 4th century. So there were a group of individuals who aligned themselves with Confucianism and another with the Daoists. And the Northerners are the Confucians, in quotation marks, and the Southerners are the Daoists. So Zhidun was asked to describe the difference between the 2 groups. At first, he's reluctant. He says, the sagely and the talented of old forget words. To return to the average person, in other words, he's not claiming to be a sage, in which case he wouldn't say anything, but as an average person, he says, Northerners in their study are like observing the moon in a clear place. Southerners' learning is like peeking at the sun through a window. Next slide. So he hasn't actually said anything, well, what is Buddhism? But he does seem to be serving with his words to point at the moon of Buddhist philosophy. He tells us what Buddhist philosophy is not. So rather than looking to some external light source, whether it's the sun or the moon, Buddhism, he implies, offers an inherent means to enlightenment. So we have to rise above our self-imposed limitations, whether they are Confucian social constructs or Daoist thought constructs, to awaken to an encompassing vision of reality. Next, please. So this is the wisdom of Madhyamaka, the middle way between affirming and denying. And this is why it's possible to adhere to the responsibility towards non-attachment. Don't become attached to one particular way of looking at things, a kind of dogmatism. Next, please. So in the Vatamsaka Sutra, they talk about the problem of the view. No view is seeing which can see all things. If one has any views about things, this is not seeing anything. So sometimes Buddhism is described as the view of no view, being open-minded. Next, please. So this is a Chinese source that is actually telling us the same thing. So the third patriarch of Chang. Just don't pick and choose. To see the truth, don't be for or against. Likes and dislikes are the mind's disease. So don't take sides so that the other is considered the enemy. Non-belief, which is the middle path between belief and disbelief. Next, please. So that's the same thing. It just shows the patriarch. Okay, next. So Buddhist teaching is called the Dharma. It is considered a raft that moves us from the shore of samsara, the cycle of birth and death, to the shore of enlightenment or nirvana. So that's the doctrine that is taught in Buddhism. However, in a deeper sense, there are no separate shores. That's just a metaphor that's being used, and there is no raft. So by knowing the dharmas taught to be similar to a raft, even dharmas are to be abandoned. Then what needs to be said about non-dharmas? So if you have to think about the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, as a raft, when you get to the other shore, you just leave it behind. It was only a means to an end. So this is the Dharma of no Dharma, just like the view of no view. Next, please. So perception, Laksana, that is something that we need to pay close attention to. So perception is not just sensory perceptions, but it's sometimes described as marks or signs or characteristics that we associate with things. It could also be names or labels. So these are all setting forth a particular view that we could be dogmatically attached to. So Master Xing Yun discusses why there's a problem with Lakshana in Buddhism. So generally speaking, the word Lakshana in Buddhism refers to deluded awareness. Any viewpoint we take is not complete. Lakshana may be thought of as the building blocks of delusion. They can be thoughts, perceptions, memories, dreams, emotions, or any other element of awareness. Next, please. So quantum mechanics actually echoes Buddhism here. So as this source says, the Scientific American, we don't perceive a purely objective world out there, but one subliminally pre-partitioned and pre-interpreted according to culture-bound categories. When we believe that we see objects and events outside and independent of mind, we are wrong in at least some essential sense. A new paradigm is needed to accommodate and make sense of the anomalies, one wherein mind itself is understood to be the essence, cognitively, but also physically, of what we perceive when we look at the world around us. So that's why Buddhism emphasizes looking at the mind and replacing the deluded mind with the Buddha mind that can actually see clearly, rather than using these pre-interpretations, edited versions of reality. Next, please. So why can't we see reality as it is? This is a very interesting comment made by a female Zen master in Japan. She's describing her awakening. She says, every time I penetrate a koan, gongan in Chinese, a thin skin peels off my mind. Layer by layer, mind's foundation is gradually becoming clear. The more I enter into the ocean of Buddha Dharma, the more I understand how deep it is. And yet it is nothing at all. A human life filled with nothing at all is a marvelous thing. So the nothing at all is the removing of thoughts and memories, emotions and sense perceptions, all of which are going to give us a warped or deluded view of reality. Next, please. So I think we can apply this to American gun culture. There are many perceptions about guns and the role they should play in American society that have led to very horrific massacres, is all we can actually say, and also have heightened the discourse between political opinions. Next, please. So some of you might be familiar with this Beatles song written by John Lennon. It's called Happiness is a Warm Gun. It's from the White Album. And he didn't make up that title. He actually found it on the cover of the American Rifleman, which is National Rifle Association publication back in the 60s. And he was trying to understand, what is it about guns that is so enticing to Americans? Why would they say something like happiness is a warm gun? And these are the lyrics. When I hold you in my arms, oh yes, when I feel my finger on your trigger, I know nobody can do me no harm. Because happiness is a warm gun, mama, happiness is a warm gun. Yes, it is. And of course, the gun is warm because it's been fired recently. Next, please. So the title comes from this article written by a person describing, as he says, his primer popping with pop from early boyhood, going out and shooting things, including live things. He mentioned squirrels. One of his happy memories, bonding with his father back in 1968. Next, please. So what fuels America's thirst for guns? I think Buddhism can help us to understand that. And I published an article about this back in 2013, about American identity and American gun culture. Next, please. So many of you might be familiar with Thomas Hobbes, who talks about human nature in a very negative way. The causes of quarrels among human beings, why we need a very strong authoritarian kind of leadership to keep us in check. He says that we are basically competitive, we are diffident or insecure, and we thrive on the notion of glory. Now, from a Buddhist perspective, that's not who we are, but there are ways that we can explain why we are competitive, insecure, and seek glory. So these are called the three poisons, why we do these things. So competition comes from greed and lust. Insecurity comes from anger and hatred. And the lust for glory comes from ignorance and delusion. And I think all of these are complicit in American gun culture in its most negative form. Next, please. So competition, greed, or lust. Gun manufacturers, entertainment industry cater to and feed the thirst for weapons, linking them to images of achievement and dominance. Competitiveness is provoked by ads and videos and television, which incites confrontation. There are even cooking shows where people compete against each other. Who's the best cook, the best chef? There are comments here that come from different sources. There's been quite a bit of research into this problem of guns, particularly with young men. There are a lot of young men in the US who will never be in the military, but feel that male compulsion to warriorhood. Owning an assault weapon is passport to that. Next. Daniel Defense is a gun manufacturer, and quite recently they posted this ad on their website with a quote from the Bible. Train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. But I don't think the Bible had in mind giving an AK-47 to a toddler. But that's how they sell their weapons. Next, please. Diffidence, anger, or hatred. So there's a perceived threat to my personal security, which makes me angry, and I hate someone who is threatening me. So for Hobbes, violence is a natural self-defense response. the fear of being victimized. America is not the only place that has this problem. This is a quote about South Africa's apartheid past. Normalize violence as a means of dealing with personal and nationwide problems. And it has created a paranoid nation obsessed with the threat of crime. Another source. Can we go back to the one? Yeah. Fantasies of rage and lust are present, but fear pervades Lamar's hip-hop world. Death corrupted the most ordinary of rituals. On an average day in middle school, fully a third of my brain was obsessed with personal safety. That's what he says. Next, please. And then glory or ignorance delusion. For Hobbes, the need to uphold our reputation leads to violence due to what he calls trifles. A word, a smile, a different opinion, any other sign of undervalue, either direct in their persons or by reflection in their kindred, their friends, their nation, their profession, or their name. Anyone who attacks me or anyone who says anything about anyone related to me. So this is an egocentric thirst to protect your sense of self-identity or group identity and to become famous. So there seems to be a sense of progression here. I have been victimized and therefore I must obliterate my oppressors. I must take responsibility for my family and protect them with deadly force. I must demonstrate my power as a member of a threatened group. So all of these things tell me I have to do this, because if I don't get them, they're going to get me first. Next, please. So in Buddhism, the Lotus Sutra, chapter 3, there is something called the burning house parable. And it actually is describing the world we live in, which is on fire with the three poisons. And we are oblivious and continue to play our games inside the burning house. So as the text says, the walls and rooms are old and decaying, the walls crumbling, the pillars rotten at their base, the beams and rafters crooked and aslant. At that time, a fire suddenly broke out on all sides, spreading through the rooms of the house. The sons of the rich man, 10, 20, perhaps 30, were inside the house. The rich man represents the Buddha. When the rich man saw the huge flames leaping up on every side, saw them engulfed in the three poisons, the flames of the poisons, he was greatly alarmed and fearful and thought to himself, I can escape to safety through the flaming gate, but my sons are inside the burning house, enjoying themselves and playing games, unaware, unknowing, without alarm or fear. The fire is closing in on them, suffering and pain threaten them, yet their minds have no sense of loathing or peril, and they do not think of trying to escape. They think it's just normal. Next, please. So it also talks about animal predators who are inside the house that are threatening them, foxes, wolves, and jackals. Today, we could replace those animals, those predators, with vampires, zombies, werewolves, gangbangers, gun marketers. As the building burns, the children persist. They insist on pursuing their mindless amusements. Today, they would be playing games. And some of those games they can play online or have very horrible names. Killzone, Battlefield, Assassins, Mortal Kombat. Playing those games, they are unaware, unknowing, without alarm or fear. Next, please. And so I inserted the picture of a young child playing on their games and in the middle of a burning house. But it's perfectly fine. They're oblivious. Next, please. So ridiculous fishing, that's the name of one of the games that is available. It's rated for players 12 and older. And as it says, first you drop your line into the ocean and tilt your phone to sneak it past as many fish as possible. The goal is to dodge the fish. Once you reach the end of your line, a fish snags your hook. You reel it back up and your purpose inverts. The goal is to catch the fish. So first you try to avoid the fish and now you're trying to catch them. And as it says, finally comes the coup de grace. Upon reaching the surface, every fish on your hook is flung into the air. You whip out a gun and start shooting. The goal is to blow the fish away. This is a reviewer recommending the game. It's in the careful balancing of these three components, the caution, the focus of the descent, the giddy anticipation of the return trip, and the orgy of finger tapping at the end, that ridiculous fishing becomes such a joy. So it simply assumes that joy consists in blowing fish away. Players 12 and up. Although it's quite likely younger players are doing that as well. So that's the end of my slides, and I think that perhaps gives us a little extra time for questions. I'd be very happy to field those questions after our next presentation. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Dr. Waritko. That was just absolutely wonderful. And I do have a bunch of questions, and I'm sure people in the audience do too. It was remarkably stimulating. And I just love this series. We have stuff on ceramics, we have stuff on Silk Road, we have stuff on Jews of China, and here we have wonderful talk about Chinese philosophies. Before we go to questions in our discussion, we'd like to have Alex Lee from University of British Columbia tell us about how we can have a bit of Zen meditation and introduction to Buddhist philosophies. Alex, feel free to take it away.
Thank you. So my presentation will build on will be built on Dr. Waritko's presentation on Buddhism. So what are the ways that we could actually approach Buddhist wisdom? So we need to learn about the approaches, because if we don't learn about the correct approaches, then Buddhism could be mysterious and even superstitious. So there are three main approaches. First, ethos, the teaching of Gautama Buddha, and also other Buddhist masters. And the second is logos, by contemplating Buddha critical philosophy. This include the middle way and the conscience only. The third and the most important is evidence, the practice and the experience of meditation. We will talk about Zen meditation and the meditation in the secret mantra. Okay, next please. So the wheels of Dharma. The wheels are Dharma. The wheels of Dharma are the teaching of Gautama Buddha. So in his lifetime, he has three major teachings called the three wheels of Dharma. In his first turning of the wheels of Dharma, or the first teaching, he told us about karma and reincarnation, also about the Four Noble Truths. So basically what karma and reincarnation means is that if you do good things, you will get good outcome. If you do bad things, then you will ended up in hell or some place that is not so good. Okay, so in the second turning, he started to goes to a deeper level of the Buddhist wisdom. He started to introduce impotence, that our world is essentially delusional, and only the world of impotence is real. He also introduced us about his heart sutra. This heart sutra, its main line is that we could use great wisdom to travel to the beyond, or travel to the shores of beyond. In the third turning, he introduced to us about the core of all Buddha's teaching, that is the Buddha nature. It has many names: the nature of the heart, the Buddha within, But essentially what it means is that we all are Buddha ourselves, but it is buried deep inside us. And if we can use Buddha's practice to let it shine, then we all can become Buddha. Okay. Next slide, please. So the massive system of Buddha's critical philosophy. So other than the two I'm talking about today, there are many critical Buddhist philosophies. They're all using logic and reasoning, trying to prove the words of Gautama Buddha. So in conscience only, it tells us that everything is a reflection of our heart. Our world is created by our heart. How to understand this? For example, if we feel happy, then when we have food, when we are happy, then the food feels much more delicious. And when we go out, this sun feels much more brighter, and we feel that everything is more beautiful. But if we are depressed or sad, then the things change. And the middle way teaches us that everything is a combination of emptiness. Okay, so for example, that myself is a combination of heart, brain, body components, and they are composed by organisms, and organisms are composed by molecules, proteins, and essentially atoms. And to the deepest or to the most detailed level, that everything is a combination of emptiness. So the world that we see actually is delusional. Okay. It will get much more complicated when this theories expand, but I'm not going to talk about the whole one today. Okay, next. So the after we have some knowledge about what Buddhism philosophy are, we are able to start practicing. And this is the only real way that we can approach Buddhist wisdom. So I will talk about two types of meditation here. They are actually in fundamentals, they're the same, but there's just two lineage. Okay, the first lineage is Zen meditation or Chan. The history of Zen meditation in China is started from Bodhidharma's travel to China. Bodhidharma is a Buddhist monk or Buddhist master in India. He traveled to China to pass his teaching to his students in China. And this includes his successor, Master Huike. And after Bodhidharma, there have been 5 other Zen masters in China, and they all are teaching only one thing, that is Zen meditation. Essentially, they are only teaching Zen meditation. So in the last master of Zen in China, Master Huineng, we see in his writing that how to practice correctly Zen meditation. So the key is the focused mind and the ultimate wisdom. So they are essentially one. So when you are focused, then you are able to get the ultimate wisdom. It's just like if there's a candle, then there's a light. And the practice of Zen meditation is essential for anyone who seeks Buddhist wisdom. Because there's no Buddhist wisdom in this world, in the outside world. As he said in his famous poem, Buddha has no trees, the mirror has no stem. And if we want to seek inner peace or the clear mind, we must meditate. That's the only way. Next, please. So I'm going to show you two pictures of me to show you the correct way to practice Zen meditation. My picture on the left is where probably most of us practice meditation, but we listen to music, we're enjoying, and we're relaxing, and maybe we are listening to guided meditation too. But in Zen meditation, we must be focused. It's essential. We could open our eyes. We can use an object to help us focus on the object, but it doesn't matter. We have to be focused. That's the key. Okay, next slide, please. Zen meditation has a lot of connection to other Chinese traditional philosophies. In Confucianism, in Daxue, you can see this focusing too. And in Daoism classics, Qing Jing Jing, we could see that the great Daos has no form, no feeling, no name, just like the Buddha nature. Okay, next slide, please. So the other type of meditation or Zen meditation I'm going to introduce today is the secret mantra. The secret mantra actually has two lineages in China. One is through the Chinese Buddhism, called Tang secret mantra. It travels from Tibet to the Eastern China, and it also passed to Japan. The other one is the Tibetan Buddhism, of course. The secret mantra flourish in Tibet. The Tang secret mantra, the Tang one, lost its lineage and most of its teaching gradually through time, but the Tibetan one has always kept a firm lineage all the way back to Guru Rinpoche. Guru Rinpoche is was an Indian monk who brought Buddhism to Tibet and the secret mantra to Tibet. And in his teaching, he also teaches Zen meditation, the focused meditation. But he has created a lot of different types of teaching for different level of practitioners, so that it can help different type of people that it build up a system. And this system is called Ultimate Yoga, or Dayuanman in Chinese. And other than the focused mind, Guru Rinpoche also emphasized on the belief to Rinpoche. Rinpoche is the teacher of the ultimate yoga. And the students, the practitioner, must keep a firm belief with Rinpoche to the point when they are meditate, they are the same as the Rinpoche. It's not they who meditates, it's Rinpoche who meditates. And this also goes true for idiom. Idiom is a specific Buddha that the practitioner, the students, choose to follow in all lives. So Rinpoche is for this life, but idiom is for all lives. And that he must keep a firm belief in idiom at all time, also in meditation. So in the deepest level of meditation, in the ultimate yoga, the person is focused and on his self, his Rinpoche, and the idiom. The three is essentially one. There's no difference in the deepest level. Yeah, okay. Next slide, please. So what is most important is that we start practice. There are two ways that I'm going to introduce to you. The first one is the meditation. I have talked about it, but essentially the logic is that if you meditate, if you keep your mind focused, then you are able to control your body, your mind, your heart. You are able to take control of yourself, basically, and to see the Buddha nature. If we don't focus or don't do meditation, we are just like living zombies, because we're controlled kind of by our feelings, our psychological mechanisms, our mind, and this stuff. So when we meditate, we can actually be alive. What is important is the meditation is to focus. We can use an object when we are meditating, but the key is just focused. And the second is sudden cut. Sudden cut is a short meditation that we can use at any time. So when we feel that emotion or our mind has taken control of ourselves, when we are depressed or sometimes when we are very happy, we can use this. It's ha! That it cuts all the feelings and give you a clear mind. The key of this is not to throw away our feelings, is to non-attachment. So you put them away, you focus on your clear mind. Okay, thank you. That's my